and I will be kind of behind the scenes monitoring the chat and doing today's introduction and the closing. If you have any questions at any time, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. I will periodically ping you, just to remind you that we are monitoring the chat box for questions as Julie does her presentation. Today we have, hopefully, the presentation that you signed up to attend and are here for is fostering a productive, healthy team. If that is in fact what you signed up for, then welcome. This is the correct place for you to be. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to message myself or Kate in the chat room, and we will try to get that fixed for you. We do encourage you, if you haven't already, to rename yourself with your preferred name and your pronouns, as well as your organization. You can do that by hovering over the 3 little dots that right in front of your face and renaming yourself that way. Finally, we'll continue to post the link to SCED in the chat box so that you can make sure that you are evaluating this, keeping up with the schedule, and connecting with folks. If there are no other questions, then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Julie.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brenna and Kate, for helping to moderate and facilitate our workshop this morning. I am really excited to talk to everyone about tools for fostering a productive, healthy team. Some of you might know me as the director for Dickinson College's Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring, or ALARM. We are a community science organization, and we work with community members in Pennsylvania and New York to teach them to use science as a tool to investigate stream health. So you might be asking yourself, why am I doing a presentation on fostering a productive and healthy team? Through my role as Alarms Director, a role I've been in for 13 years, I have the immense pleasure and unique opportunity to work with college students and to also work with full and part-time staff. And so through my years of experience, I've really taken the approach of having an adaptive management style. And so I always like to take the opportunity to read and refresh on topics of communication and team dynamics. And I love that the Bay Forum is a place where we can share out and have these conversations about how to run healthy, effective organizations so that we can effectively do our work for the Chesapeake Bay. In addition to this, I'm also a certified yoga instructor. I have my 200-hour certification, and I'm working on my 500 hours. So yoga, self-care, and productive team dynamics are certainly some passion points for me. So for today's 90 minutes, we have what I'd like to call a mindfulness sandwich with some fun discussion and notable nuggets in between. So we'll get started in a few minutes with an opening centering and some gentle yoga movements to help, connect to our posture and stretch a little bit. And then we're going to dive into effective goal setting, specifically looking at the SMART SMART goal setting technique. And then we're going to create some space in the middle of that sandwich for some self-reflection and also some breakout groups to talk about how you can use tools like SMART as you're developing your project goals and your work at your organization. And then we'll come back and talk about those notable nuggets that you all discussed in your breakout groups. After that, we're going to take a break before we transition into talking about communication styles and creating a safe and supportive workspace. So we'll do a little bit of yoga, and then we'll move into the final portion of the communication, and then end with a closing centering and hand it back over to Brenna for last housekeeping. So with that, let's go to our next slide. I believe it's time to do, it's time to do some yoga. So we can go ahead and stop with the screen share. So to get started with an opening centering, would love to invite everyone to, come into a nice supported seated position. So if you're in an office chair like me, something that you might want to do is you can either keep your back right up against the support of your chair, or you can come to the edge of your chair. And when you do that, it helps to lift your spine and takes the pressure out of your low back so that you can have a nice, tall, and long spine. So take a moment to get situated in your seat, maybe wiggle around and see if you can find that point where your sits bones can root down into your chair. And then with breath, begin to lengthen through your spine, starting with your tail, moving up through your different spinal regions, and eventually bringing that lengthening energy into your neck, shining the crown of your head towards the ceiling. And connecting to this nice, long, and supported spine, begin to connect to your natural breath. Watching the air as it enters your body and feel it exit on out. Breathing in and breathing out. And while maintaining that breath awareness, at the start of your next inhale, begin to bicycle your shoulders forward. You might do this alternating one shoulder at a time, or you might circle them simultaneously, seeing what feels good to you. A lot of times in our workday, we hold stress in our upper back and neck, and so doing some gentle movements is nice and helpful. Pause and reverse. And as you're drawing your shoulders back, see what it's like to shine your heart forward and really creating that nice open space in front. Breathing in and breathing out. Go ahead and bring that motion to a close. And with your next inhale, draw your shoulders up to your ears, squeezing them up there. Exhale, release. We're going to do that again. Inhale your shoulders up to your ears. Exhale, release. And go ahead and wiggle back around in your seat and establish that nice long spine again. And connecting back to your natural breath. And gradually you're going to start to build your breath. See if you can lower your breath from your upper chest into your low ribs if you have any pelvic floor modifications that you work with, or if you're comfortable with it, bringing it into your belly. Breathing in, billowing your belly, low ribs out. Exhale, draw your low ribs and belly in. Breathing in and breathing out. As we're moving through our days, it's so important to pause and connect back to your breath. Breathing in and breathing out. See if you can breathe in for a count of 2. And with your exhale, breathe out to a count of 3. Anytime you're able to elongate your exhale for 30 seconds to 60 seconds, you're able to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So if you find yourself with a little elevated stress throughout your workday, come to your breath and take a minute to breathe, seeing if you can elongate that exhale, helping to reduce anxiety and stress. And while maintaining that breath awareness, at the start of your next inhale, draw both palms together, raising your hands up through your center line. And at the start of your exhale, circle your arms out to the sides and down. And at the start of your next inhale, press both palms together, raising them up. Exhale, circle them down. Breathing in and out in this modification of what's called sun breath. And we'll play with this later on. And seeing what it's like to pair movement with breath. At the end of your next exhale, release your arms at your sides, return to your natural breath, and then bring your hands to rest on your heart. Connecting to the heartbeat underneath of your hands. If there's an intention you wish to set for our time together, breathe it in, exhale, release it out. Releasing your arms at your sides and wiggling around in your seat. We're going to continue to open through our arms and our shoulders. Shoulder blades back and down. Inhale, draw your arms up overhead. And with your next exhale, draw your right hand down, reaching your left hand up, and then reverse. It's as if you're reaching for an imaginary rope, but you're still keeping your body within 2 panes of glass. You're not doing any deep twisting right now. Helping to open through your sides and continuing to open through your shoulders. Drawing both arms up overhead. Inhale, stretch. Exhale, release your arms at your sides. And then bringing your hands to your knees, spine nice and tall. Take a breath in. And with your exhale, reach the center of your spine behind you, dropping your neck and head. Inhale, shine your heart forward. Moving back and forth in what's called cat and cow. And with any movements I might suggest today, if anything feels uncomfortable, please modify, listen to your body, honor what it tells you, and modify as you see fit. Moving back and forth in your seated cat and cow and really opening through your spine and also playing with that heart opener at the end of your cow. The next time you find your heart shining forward, draw your torso vertical and go ahead and wiggle it out. Bringing that motion to a close. With your next inhale, rotate your shoulder blades back and down and really reach the crown of your head towards the ceiling. And with your next in-breath, you're going to draw your arms up overhead. And then you're going to gently twist your spine. Gently, folks. Don't go too far, too deep, too soon. And then lower your hands down. Inhale, sweep your arms up overhead and then gently twist to the right, lowering your hands down. Moving through the seated, twisted movement back and forth. Breathing in and breathing out. Always in my training, we talked about how we hold stress energy in our spine. And so being able to open your spine doing cats and cows and little gentle twists can help release that. The next time you find your hands up overhead, pause there, stretch, reaching your fingertips towards the ceiling. Exhale, release your hands towards your legs and go ahead and wiggle it out. Bringing that motion to a pause, connect back to your natural breath. And take a moment to check out the potential effects of our breath work and those gentle movements on your body. Opening your eyes and ready to re-engage. I think that's a good note to start our effective communications conversation. Gonna take a moment to draw up my presentation here. All right, so one of the reasons why I like to bring yoga and breath work into the workplace, and especially around conversations of communication and goal setting and whatnot, is it's really important that throughout our days that we take those moments to get grounded so that we're able to bring our best selves into our projects and our work. So that's one of the reasons why I like to do yoga throughout the day. But now we're going to transition into talking about effective goal setting. So this is something that we do day in and day out with our jobs, our work, our projects. And there's a lot of different ways that we can set goals. It can be something that is simple as creating your morning to-do list and what you'd like to achieve today. That gives you a list of tasks that you're looking to accomplish in any given day. It can then be brought out into a more macro level, looking at your week and the dynamic of projects that you're managing throughout that week. And of course, you can also bring it up into those organizational buckets and key projects where you're looking at projects over a landscape of time. But before we dive into talking about specific tools like SMART goals, want to first root where goals fit in as you're looking at your organizational implementation strategies. And so these are things that we're all familiar with our organizations. Hopefully we all have a vision statement, you know, that big picture statement about what you're looking to achieve in the world with the work that you do. So it's a very 30,000 foot lens approach to what you're trying to achieve at your organization. And then that whittles down into our mission statements. And this is where we start to get into the nuts and bolts and the essence of the organization. These are those general statements of how you will achieve your vision. And that is typically what gets tied in with the identity of an organization. From there, some organizations have strategies, and this is really helpful if you have a multi-pronged mission or diverse ways in which you achieve your work. So you might have strategies, those avenues through which you achieve your vision and mission. And then we come into our goals. And goals are the general statements of what needs to be accomplished to implement a strategy. You know, it's that lofty term goal of what it is that we'll be achieving over a specific time frame. But we save those specific details for the next two options here. The next is looking at objectives, and that's where you're getting into a little bit more of your laundry list of activities and tasks that will be done. And those are going to mark your different milestones along your specific project timeline. And then another tool that can be used to encapsulate all of this are using action plans, where you have your mission, your strategy, your goals, and then you break it out in terms of objectives for your different project areas. But for today's specific conversation, we're honing in on our goals and how to set those effectively. So a couple of things that we like to talk about with goal setting as those best management practices. And the first and foremost is planning. You can never disregard the value that planning can play in helping to achieve your goals and really making sure that a project is successful. A tool we use a lot in the scientific field is study design. And so I feel that SMART goal setting is like the equivalent of study design, but for looking at how a project gets implemented. So a couple of different best management practices with goal setting. So obviously planning is super important, making sure that you have your whole team together, anyone who might be impacted by the project or contributing to the project, making sure that their voice is heard right from the beginning. The next thing that you want to focus on in terms of a best practice is transparency. You know, as things ebb and flow and shift and change, being able to have open conversations about that and highlighting that with everyone involved is really important, because then everyone is on the same page with communication. Things that go right on hand in hand with transparency is also participation and making sure that folks are really clear about what their roles are going to be from start to finish of the different project goal that they are looking to implement. Another best practice for goal setting is making sure that you're always seeing how your goals are connected to the vision and mission of the organization. Another thing that's really important with goal setting is we've got to build in flexibility. Oh my goodness, party people, if we've learned anything in 2020, it is how to be flexible, nimble, and adaptive in crazy changing times. So flexibility is always important. You don't want to build your timelines too rigid, so that there is that space so things can change and adapt as things come up. And then the other thing to keep in mind with goal setting is making sure that you have a way of evaluating your success. And that includes evaluation throughout the project being implemented and also at completion. Being able to have those points of feedback really helps to inform that project as you're moving it forward. So again, getting into effective goal setting and what is a goal? So I'm a really big fan of action plans so that you can see your mission statement, a project, and then have your goals laid out. And then you can bring in your objectives all on a single page or two. So a goal is a written statement that clearly describes the specific actions or tasks with a measurable end result and a clear deadline. So this is a multifaceted statement. It might even be a couple of sentences, but you get my sense. There's trying to capture a couple of key things: action items, measurable end results, clear deadline. And so when you're developing a goal, some things to look for with that is making sure you have a description, some milestones built in, and a clear deadline. So some strategies to help flesh this out is using SMART goal setting. I'm a really big fan of SMART, and you see like slightly different words being used with different models of this, but it all essentially gets at the same thing. So first and foremost, you want to be specific. And again, with your goal setting, this is not that laundry list of tasks that's getting a little bit more into your objectives, but it is making sure that there's a clear deliverable of what we're trying to achieve, that action item that will happen at the end of your goal being met. The M for this is measurable. You want to make sure that you have clearly defined metrics that you're going to use to make sure that you know that you have reached your goals. Another crucial element with goal setting is making sure that it's attainable and realistic. So that's where sometimes when those goals feel a little bit out of reach or too lofty, that might actually be more something like a strategy or fitting more into a mission statement. So really want to make sure that goals are realistic and attainable. Relevant, again, making sure that any project goal is fitting in with the goals and objectives of your organization, and it's timely and all sorts of types of things, and everyone's on board. That's what we mean by relevant. And then time sensitive. Oh my goodness, if everyone here could raise a hand, if you are someone who is deadline driven, you understand the importance of having deadlines and benchmarks along the way within setting up your project. So let's go ahead and get into some examples here. I'm going to use one of our project areas and use a concept that I think is probably relevant for everyone here, and how we took a project area and we're in the process of adapting to these COVID global and pandemic circumstances that we're finding ourselves in. So we're going to take a look at one program area at the Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring, and that's Alarm Stream Team. And I have my colleague Stephanie Letourneau on here in today's session. She helps to run Stream Team, so she could tell you all about this. But the goal of Stream Team is to engage community volunteers in the collection of water quality data and use those data for change. So folks are going out in teams on a monthly basis to collect water quality data. So you can imagine that a few things and through a few wrenches were thrown in the works, as with all of our work, when COVID hit. And so we actually made the decision because we needed to really, figure out what was going on with COVID and safety guidelines, and, being sensitive to the different state guidelines of open, close that we operate in. We shut down our program and shut down stream monitoring from March through the end of June. And so we had to come up with a goal, and that was to adapt to the COVID circumstances. So a description of this goal: during a time when Alarm couldn't connect with its volunteers in person, it was essential that we develop some opportunities for engagements so that we could stay connected with our volunteers during this gap of one, uncertainty, but also a pause within the program. So the goal here is to come up with virtual learning opportunities and engagement. Milestone within this. Now, milestones can take on many different forms, but something that was a big learning curve for us and still is identifying and exploring asynchronistic learning tools and virtual platforms. And then a deadline: within 6 months, we had the goal of developing and implementing 3 skill building opportunities. So how does that whittle down as we apply it to SMART? So again, S is for specific, and really you're looking at the who, what, where, whys, and potential obstacles here. So for example, the who's are really important for us within this specific example. We have a lot of volunteers, and we also have project partners that we needed to balance, and making sure that their voices were a part of that transparent and participatory process. So some specific examples here: we asked volunteers what they'd like to have during this time. We also developed some virtual skill building educational resources to help people engage over those 6 months. We engaged with our key project partners, the Master Watershed Stewards Program, county conservation districts, and river keepers, to see how we could do this collectively. And then we also needed to build Alarm's internal capacity around virtual learning. Then we go into the M, measurable, again, looking at those metrics that are used to determine whether or not we've met our goal. So this is where you start to get into some of those specific elements here. So we wanted to create 3 different engagement opportunities, and we honed in on very specific topics that were relevant to monitoring and could help deepen our volunteer skill sets during this time. And then we also had goals around reach. So we wanted to be able to engage 15 to 30 people in a synchronistic participation format, and then hoping that at minimum 25 people are watching YouTube videos or looking at Zoom recording links and resources asynchronistically. Achievable. So again, this is making sure that this goal is realistic. So since this was new for us, we had to take some time to build our skill sets. So an example of an achievable element to SMART goals is the Alarm team participating in webinars about online teaching best practices, and then take existing resources that we have and start to create some hybrid learning opportunities as we moved it into virtual formats. That helped to make it more realistic to start with some things that we had in place but had never put into a virtual format. Relevant. Why is this important? This is a good thing to always have in your goal setting, because as things start to get stressful, it's good to remember why you're doing something in the first place. And for us, like, this is crucial. We can't do our work without our incredible volunteers and our partners. And so it was a really high priority for us to make sure that people stayed connected. And then the T with this, time sensitive, we set the goal for 6 months and then identified specific milestones within those 6 months and a timeline to get that achieved. So that gives you a sense of some of the ways that you can use SMART to goal setting. So at this point, hopefully everyone in the chat has been able to connect to a Google worksheet to help with some reflection activities. And so we're going to move into some reflection activities right now. So the first thing that we're going to ask folks to do is to take 2 minutes and think of a project that you've worked on or are working on, and see how you can apply SMART to that specific project and start to generate some ideas. And then we'll break out into breakout groups so that folks can talk about their tools that have worked well for them. And while you're in those breakout groups, take note of those really notable nuggets that you wish to come back to the group and share. So let's go ahead and pull up those worksheets and start moving into that space of reflection. And I'll set a timer for that. All right, all right. So if folks had really good conversations or other tips within your small breakout groups, go ahead and throw those ideas into the chat. And one of the things I am noticing, Brenna, is since I am sharing my screen, is I can't see the chat. So, ooh, wait, maybe I figured it out. Okay. Ooh, oh, that is a good question, Julie Hester, about balancing goals that are attainable but not too safe. You want to push being innovative and edgy. Yeah, that is a delicate balance. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, when you're starting to build out a new project idea, making sure you're building in time to pilot. You know, we do that a lot as we're trying to build new monitoring techniques or forms of engagement. That's one of the advantages of being based at Dickinson College and having a team of students when we are in person, which we're not right now, is that opportunity to test out in safe, controlled environments before engaging other folks. But yeah, keep those ideas coming and throw them in the chat if you had anything super cool in your discussion that you'd like to share out with everyone. All right, so some other things as we, look at goals and effective goal setting. There's a laundry list of articles out there about tips and tricks to effective goal setting. And I spent a little bit of time sorting through and seeing what seemed best for nonprofit settings. And so these are some of the tips that came up with. So planning, so we've talked about that a little bit. And I love Suzanne Atkins' comment that there's always that tension between planning and doing. Sometimes it feels safer to be in the planning process and not the doing process. We see that a lot in some academic discussions that take place at our institution. And I'm like, stop discussing, it's time to start putting plans into motion. I'm sure everyone has seen that take place. Listen to feedback is super important, especially if you are piloting something new as opposed to refining an existing project. Feedback in that iterative evaluation is so important. Be willing to be open to new ideas and to mentor others to help bring them on board and build their skill set. Be proactive. We see that a lot, in working with college students. Sometimes they like to really wait until they feel like they have the confidence to move forward. And sometimes I think, that lovely mantra of fake it till you make it can be really important here, and just be proactive and give it a go. Same with being self-reflective. The more you know, the power of knowing is really important. And I think it's important whether you're a teammate or a team manager to be, putting that mirror up and be open to the mirrors that other people might hold up for you, so that, you can be true about how the project is moving forward. Balancing team and individual aspirations is really important. So as you're developing your goals, and this is especially true for those long-term projects, I'm noticing that question in the chat, is making sure that you're clear with what happens at the team level and what are the individual pieces that support those different efforts over a span of time. Other things, having a clear culture around open conversations and being able to talk about challenges. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. letting people be in charge of their own destinies. Sometimes we just got to give it a go and see what happens. Again, I love our students, and sometimes we see folks starting out to do a project and we can see where things could go wrong. And so there's that delicate balance of being like, okay, so here's some ideas. Have you considered this? If this came up in your presentation, how would you handle it? And sometimes us, people want to stick to their plan, and actually making steps and mistakes is a really great part of the learning process. Other things with goals, making sure we're breaking things down into small steps, and investing in professional development. Like what I was saying with SMART, we really needed to invest in our organizational development around virtual learning platforms and asynchronistic learning. Recognize achievements. Oh my goodness, people, in COVID, we really have to lean into any joy and light and achievements that we can. So yeah, just gonna take another look at the chat before we move into our next slide. Our group talked about bringing in SMART when we've already started a project, feels awkward and working in reverse. Sometimes that happens. One of the things that, again, I like to say that SMART is the project-oriented way of goal setting, and science study design is that process. And I can't tell you the number of times we see groups going out, monitoring without thinking about why they're doing it in the first place, Jenny. And so sometimes people just want to get started and go. And then you find yourself needing to backtrack a little bit. And I know our team definitely struggled with that with COVID, where it was like, oh my goodness, we have had, we're working from home. We can't see our volunteers. We canceled 18 events in the spring. And we're like, we got to do something. We just got to get started on something. And started to launch into things and then had to take some steps back. And so I think if it's an opportunity to refocus and grow, going back to goal setting, even if you've started to go into a project, can be a fruitful process.
And Julie, we had a question too, right above that. What advice would you give when applying SMART if you're doing multiple long-term projects?
Yeah, so I think you want to make sure that your timetable is limited. So if you have, for example, so awesome to be a part of a project with the Alliance for Chesapeake Bay, the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative. It's a 6-year project and grant. And so one of the things that we have to do in that is come up with subset of goals, project deliverables, and guidelines. And then it's been broken out. The work plan is broken out by year. And within that yearly work plan, there's sub goals as it relates to different project deliverables. So it really is about breaking things up and managing it into bite-sized pieces. One of the things I found consistently in the readings that I was doing about SMART goals is to try to not have your time frame be longer than 6 months and absolutely not longer than a year, because it can get really hard to anticipate conditions out a certain point. We don't know how rainy 2021 will be. We couldn't see at the beginning of the year that 2020 was going to be a drought in addition to COVID and all the other things. And so one of the reasons why you want to keep a slightly shorter time frame is so that you can build in that flexibility to be nimble. So yeah, so it is all about seeing the big picture and then being able to break things down into manageable bite-sized pieces. Is there anything else I'm missing in there, Brenna?
Nope, not so far.
Okay, thank you so much. So we were able to do a couple of questions and address some of the comments here. And if you have other questions or comments, keep them coming in the chat. But at this point, kind of feel like, we talked about goal setting. We might have gotten a little stressed. Might be time to do some yoga again. So we're going to break this out and come back to a little bit of yoga. So with this, want to bring in some additional movements. And so if people are able to stand, we're going to go through some standing exercises and ways to elevate energy, but all of this can also be done seated. So as before, please make sure that you're practicing to your own abilities. and comfort level. And if anything feels weird or wonky, go ahead and take this as an opportunity to make yourself a cup of tea or grab a snack. All right, so when we started off our session, we warmed up with a little bit of breath work, and we also started to warm up in our shoulders and our spine. So let's go ahead and revisit some of those motions, coming to the edge of our chair, reestablishing a nice long spine, and begin to wiggle it out. One of my mom's favorite movies when I was a kid was Sister Act, and Whoopi Goldberg, and one of the scenes is like, let's see that deep shoulder action throughout the day. You want to engage some deep shoulder action. So let's go ahead and do that. Bringing that to a pause, roll those shoulders back and shine your heart forward. Now, if folks are comfortable standing, go ahead and come up onto your feet. And if not, you can do this seated, and I'll try to keep my chair nearby to provide some examples. So as you're standing, go ahead and take a look at your feet. We talk a lot about shoulder widths in our stances in yoga. And so we're gonna pause and take a look at our feet and see if they are shoulder width. So we're gonna do that. The other thing we wanna do with our stance here is we want our feet to be parallel to one another. So as we're standing, let's go ahead and wiggle out our legs, getting that nice little hip motion. If we were taking a salsa class right now, we're shimming and shifting those hips. We're gonna bring that into our spine and then our shoulders. You might even get it into your neck. Go ahead and wiggle. And if we had some nice salsa music right now, you could just, envision yourself opening up to that. Go ahead and bring that to a close, and we're once again gonna roll our shoulders back and shine our heart forward. And with our spine nice and tall, we're gonna bring a lengthening energy up our legs and pause at your hips. You're gonna rotate your hips forward, you're gonna rotate them back, moving back and forth until you feel like your hips are nice and level. Once you have found that, take your hands and press down on your hips right here, and then draw the crown of your head away from your hands. Do you feel that nice opening in your spine? And once you have found that, open your palms out to the side. And as you're doing this, if you're doing this seated, you can work on having that nice tall spine, arms out to the side. With your shoulder blades back and down, breathing in, finding length in your body, and breathing out, connecting to this mountain pose that you have formed here. Breathing in and breathing out. With your next inhale, draw your arms up overhead. Exhale, circle them down. So we started in the beginning of our session with a modification of this sun breath, and we're moving back to it, but doing a full standing one. The nice thing about sun breath as you're standing, if you're able to, is you can actually make it a full body motion. Bending your knees, still keeping your spine long as you draw down. One of my yoga teachers always said it's like scooping up flowers and then opening your arms up overhead. And as you're doing sun breath, let's say you've had a stressful meeting and you need to release some energy, breathing in and breathing out and really allowing that momentum to flow through your body. The next time your arms are up overhead, pause there. Reach your fingertips up towards the ceiling. Exhale, lower your hands at your sides and go ahead and wiggle it out. Bringing that motion to a close, we're going to return back to that shoulder width stance. And we're going to draw our arms out into a T position with our palms shining forward. Inhale, stretch out. Exhale, cross your arms, giving yourself a little hug. Inhale, open. Exhale, cross. And as you're moving back and forth in this flapping motion, you're going to reverse which arm is on top. Breathing in and breathing out. The next time your arms are crossed, hold there. Give your shoulders a nice squeeze. Reach the crown of your head towards the ceiling and circle at your elbows. Pause and reverse. Bringing that to a pause, inhale, open, and then reverse which arm is on top, which I couldn't remember. I'm going this way. And then go ahead and circle your elbows. Pause and reverse. Really shining the crown of your head towards the ceiling as you do that. Bring that motion to a pause. Inhale, open, stretch. Exhale, lower your hands at your sides. And go ahead and wiggle out your legs. Now we're gonna widen our stance. We're gonna come into 1.5 hip width apart, or you can come into 2, completely up to you. Inhale your arms up overhead, and you can either interlace your fingers, creating like a steeple position with your hands, or you can hold on to your wrists, or you can reach your right hand up, lower your left hand towards your hip. Inhale, find length. Exhale, reach your right fingertips or your fingertips to the ceiling corner, left ceiling corner. So if your arms are extended, you want to reach those fingertips to the ceiling corner, activating a stretch on the inside and outside of your body. This is half moon. Breathing in, out. And with your inhale, draw your torso vertical, realign your spine, and then make your way over to the opposite side. And again, you're keeping your body within 2 panes of glass, so you're not twisting in any way, keeping it nice and level. Connecting to that sensation on the inside and outside of your body. And with your next in-breath, draw your torso vertical and release your hands at your sides and go ahead and wiggle it out. So with this next pose, we're gonna start back in that standing position. And if you are able to stand, we're gonna do a Kriya to warm up, and I'll give a modification for folks doing this in a chair. So with your stance nice and tall, inhale, lift your left knee, and then step your left foot back. Your feet are landing on railroad tracks here. And then you're gonna draw that foot back forward, returning to a standing position. Inhale, lift your right knee, and then step it back. Moving back and forth. Stepping into a high lunge and beginning to open through your legs and your hips. Now, if you're doing this in a chair, you have the option of shimmying one knee forward, dropping your right knee down, and then you can shift to the opposite side. It's a similar motion to open through your hips, breathing in and breathing out. The next time you find yourself with your knees together standing, we're gonna pause there. For folks who are standing, we're gonna come into a warrior stance or a power pose. Spine's nice and tall, shoulder blades back and down. Inhale, lift your left knee and step your left foot back into your high lunge. First, establishing your nice balance here, and check in with your hips. You might need to draw your left hip forward just a little bit to square them up. And once you have found your desired leg position, then you can play with your arms. Stretching your arms up overhead. If you're feeling tight in your shoulders, cactus arms and bring your elbows back towards one another, or hands at your hips. Breathing in and breathing out. And if you're in a chair position, you can hold with that knee bent. With your next in-breath, go ahead and lower your hands down and go ahead and step your left foot forward and wiggle out through your legs. And we're gonna do that on the opposite side. Inhale, lift your right knee and step your right foot back. And when you're landing in your high lunge, check in with the position of your knee in relationship to your ankle. If you have knee sensitivity like I am, you don't wanna go past your ankle. You want it above or just shy of it. And then go ahead and find your desired arm position. Breathing in and breathing out. Finding length in your spine with your in-breath and connecting to the power of this pose with your out-breath. And again, if you're in a chair, you can modify this way as well. With your next inhale, step your back foot forward, coming into a standing position, and go ahead and wiggle it out. And with that, we're gonna bring those motions to a close and make our way into our next section. And hopefully you're noticing that your heart rate might be up a little bit. You might, be breathing in a different way, and hopefully you feel a little bit looser and powerful from our poses. All right. Hopefully this is looking okay. And if anyone has any questions or anything like that, feel free to drop it into the chat. Okay, so now that we've done a little bit of yoga and talked about smart goal setting, let's talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's effective communication. All right, so communication is the key to all project success. I think it's the key to any relationship success. There's so many ways in which communication plays a crucial role in the workplace. And so we spend a lot of time communicating at Alarm, and especially when you're balancing, that we have students, we have part and full-time staff. You have to have a way of making sure that everyone has that opportunity to connect to each other as humans and be able to work together on our projects. So it's really important to create a safe and supportive workplace environment. One of the things that we talk about a lot at Alarm when it comes to our day-to-day activities is making sure that we put the human first and the organization second. That's really important because our entire body of work it relies on people feeling connected and feeling like they're ready to, they're in it to win it, to achieve different goals. And so seeing the whole human, whether that's your volunteers, your teammate, a partner that you work with closely, is super, super important. And one of the things I thought was really great as I was scouring the literature coming into today's session was seeing some of the language that was used in some of these human resources websites and resources. And I particularly liked this quote: "Bring your soul to work. Facades of cold, firm professionalism is more detrimental than bringing your authentic self." And that's one of the things that we find as we're working with our students. Oftentimes it's their first time in a professional workplace. And so they feel like they need to be like very rigid and cold. And so the full-time and part-time team are always trying to put our human selves first to set that example. The other thing, I thought this line was a little like, ooh, that was a little harsh, but I get your point. That as you're connecting and seeing whole humans and knowing that everyone is having human experiences is also walking that fine balance of knowing what is going on in people's lives, but also making sure that if people need additional resources to be successful, that you direct them to the right places, like therapy or other resources and stuff like that. But yeah, so I thought that was an interesting line in this publication. So moving on, I thought that this was really cool. Reasonable expectations in a relationship. And this was in specific for workplace environments. And I was just like, I think this is true for all relationships. Really leading with compassion and heart. I mean, we work in a grassroots effort. Like the amazing thing about Bay Forums and coming together as a central regionalized community is we're in this to connect with our hearts and do this work together in a passionate and caring way. And so, it's really important that even in our like subgroup dynamics to focus on cultivating compassion, respect, making sure that there's interest in you and your life. But again, having boundaries where that is appropriate. Making sure there's ample time for communication and connection, generosity, and that's not necessarily material. Appreciation is really important. And, one of the things I'll talk about later on in the session is, not blanket appreciation, but be specific. When you're specific with appreciation and feedback and things like that, it really shows that you see an individual's hard work and the different individual contributions that are coming out, as opposed to a blanket statement, "Oh, you did a great job," type of thing. Being able to clearly express and agree on what's important within a team dynamic or a two-person relationship. So, setting those meaning norms and culture norms, values within your organization is really important. And other things for expectations in a relationship is being flexible and reasonable. things change, life happens. You never know when we're going to get curveballs. And again, I think 2020 has been more than enough of a teacher with that. So something that I thought was really cool as I was working on this session was I found all these articles about the benefits of water cooler talk, which I thought was super cool. And again, kind of gets at the point that it is important to have personal connections within a workplace. So our workplace is a third of our lives. So how can we make it healthy and productive? Research shows, and I have like 8 articles that, touches on this and is very consistent, that social connections at work help to build a sense of community and belonging. We know that, man, if we could be at NCTC right now, eating shared meals and enjoying those fantastic snacks together, like we know what that sense of community and belonging means for us in our Chesapeake work. It helps to reduce stress and it helps to increase joy. And if this is something that's feeling a little bit new for you at your organization or within your team, there's a couple of ways that you can structure this so that you can test out the waters and see how it goes. So having a dedicated time for connection. So for example, at Alarm, I don't know, I think I got this from a TV show. We have campfire chats in the beginning of the day. And it's an opportunity for people to share, like, is there anything cool from the night before? There's a lot of talk about food that we've made. And anything people want to share, anything updates that folks think is important to know. And then we take a look at the day ahead. And so it's just a way to recenter. And it's something that takes maybe 10 minutes in the morning. A dedicated space. So obviously in COVID world, this isn't happening, but I'm in one of our student workspaces. And over on the side is our tea kettle and our tea cabinet. And this is the place that is meant to be a place to gather and connect with one another. It takes about 5 minutes for our water kettle, depending on how full it is, to boil. And so like that is the perfect amount of time when people come in, we're like, go get a cup of tea. And they'll come over here and they'll have a chance to connect and chat. Or if I'm looking to have a check-in conversation that's casual, I'll be like, hey, let's go make some hot chocolate or tea. And so there's a dedicated space for that within an office. And that's something you could think about too. Kitchen spacious, food is always a wonderful gathering point. Share a meal. Oh my gosh. So we are very food centric at Alarm. I love it. Being able to like have snacks and things like that together is important. We'll do things like that in our in-person staff meetings when we are able to actually have them. And then another thing that you can try as well is walk and talks. So folks who have been in sessions with me before, I love walk and talks because it is a great way when you're walking parallel with someone and not making eye contact, you have the ability to talk about things in a slightly different way because you're not seeing people's reactions in their eyes. And sometimes people can feel more open walking and moving and talking about something as opposed to sitting across the table. And that's something that's especially important when you're when you're thinking through a project or you have an introverted person on staff, and more on that later. So those are some ideas there. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted by the chat, but I'm just going to keep moving forward in the conversation. But yeah, so in terms of like this water cooler, and we don't need to, I'm not bought into the term of water cooler. We can call this personal connections etiquette. So things to think about, some do's and don'ts. Discuss shared interests, things like music, food, etc. Ask questions. Oh my goodness, like it feels so good when someone asks a follow-up question, and making sure that people feel really comfortable about saying, hey, I'm good. I don't really want to go further down that path. That's really important. Leaving personal problems at home. I think that that's a little bit of a tricky gray area. Like so you have to navigate that within your team as to what's appropriate to share and not. Avoid ear chewing, talking behind people's backs. I really hope that doesn't happen. Open communication is a way to avoid that. and so on and so forth. And I think a key thing with, your connection time is knowing when to go back to work. There's always going to be someone that's going to start to get antsy, and honor that. That's a great signal that, yeah, you're probably done chatting and it's time to get focused. But I'm always amazed by how even like our students know when to pause and go back to work. So I am not like looking at the chat significantly, but I just saw a question about what if a leader is an introvert? Oh my goodness, I've been reading so much about introverted leaders lately because we have some introverts on our team, and I think that it is really important to balance extroverted and introverted energy, and making sure that we're cultivating that in everyone in a safe and appropriate way. So what are some ways to have really good communication with a balance of team of introverts and extroverts? First and foremost is setting agendas ahead of time with a list of questions or topics to consider. So I have a particular teammate who's super introverted, and so before every meeting, I'll be like, hey, here's the agenda. Here are the things I definitely want you to be able to talk about. And so those kinds of gentle heads up are really good. When you're in a meeting, introverts often listen to observe and learn, and extroverts, we tend to like listen to respond. And so making sure that like we take a breath and take a moment to reflect and make sure you're engaging everyone. And that can happen in a couple of different ways. By having an agenda set ahead of time with some discussion points, that gives your team who don't feel as comfortable, talking in front of the group to send in their comments. And then you can say, hey, I'd like for you to share this and ask some follow-up questions. So if that's comfortable for people, the other thing is just making sure that you help the talkative ones in your group be quiet. I'm one of those, and be like, okay, hey, why don't you say, call on people within the group and see if they have anything they want to add to the conversation. I think the step up, step back awareness is really important to help balance voices, and being really aware of the space that you're taking up in a conversation, and notice whether or not you're doing a lot of talking and, create the space for other voices to come into that. All right, so because I have been reading a lot about introverted leaders, I wanted to give a shout out to our introverted leaders. And there's this really great book. It's available. It's an ebook called The Introverted Leader: Building on Your Quiet Strengths, not strength. Anyway, strengths. I forgot an S there. And I've learned a lot about even if you're an extrovert, being able to understand ways to access people's strengths so that you're not leading in one particular way, and really being able to have that adaptive management. So one of the things that's really highlighted in this book, and also in some other articles I've been reading, is how introverts are really thoughtful listeners, and they can be very good with asking questions in a nice, compassionate way. A quote that I pulled from this book: quietest people have the loudest minds. And so, being able to pause and make sure you're able to create those opportunities for those feedbacks and those thoughts to come out, whether that's in written form or in verbal form, is really important. I thought the 4 Ps of introverted leaders was interesting, about some of the characteristics of introverted leaders. One is introverted leaders tend to prepare really well. And again, being present in the moment, staying in the moment. They're constantly pushing themselves out of their comfort zone, because we do tend to operate in more extroverted landscapes. And they're constantly practicing different tools and things like that. And so that was just really eye-opening. And in reading this, I've already started to shift the ways that I balance some of our office meetings and things like that, and also balancing that within a COVID world as well. I gotta say that we use Teams at Dickinson College, and so the ability to send chats is really a nice quick way for folks to chime in and provide some thoughts. Okay. So with that, so in the worksheet, I have a couple of different sections on communication. that I think would be good to reflect on, especially if you do find yourself in a situation where you have a challenging communication dynamic, is really looking at some of those questions in the top part of that second page and thinking through the ingredients of what works and what does not work. When you start to be able to identify those ingredients, that's when then you can start being able to address specific things and or bring those ingredients into other conversations. So whether or not you do this now or later, I'm taking a note of the time and want to move to the next reflection slide. So this is at the bottom of that sheet. Is I really want to get into the element of safety in a workplace to bring up work roadblocks. This is something that we struggle a lot, especially with our students. They're so afraid to admit that they're struggling. And so really want to ask everyone to take 2 minutes to take a look at this section of those worksheets and think about what helped, what didn't, how did your teammates or your team manager respond, and think about whether or not you have some ideas that you want to bring to the group in the chat. So if everyone could turn to that second page and focus on this second set of questions that look at work roadblocks, that'd be great. And I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes. And in these next 20 seconds, if you have ideas or questions or thoughts that you want to bring into the chat, go ahead and take a moment to populate the chat with your thoughts. Okay. So we're at the end of that time. So do folks have reflections on, best ways of bringing up challenges within a project or roadblocks or anything like that? If you have questions or ideas, go ahead and throw them in the chat. And while we're waiting for the chat to get populated with that, did want to touch on a couple of things that I am seeing in the chat. I also have read like 10 different articles on cultivating connections with your team on COVID. And so having things like Teams chats or a place where people can write quick comments. We're a big fan of GIFs. It's a debate as to whether or not that is pronounced GIF or GIFs. And that's just like a fun way to be able to check in. One of the things that really comes up in reading is making sure that you're having space to check in with your team members at least twice during the day, and having some dedicated time for that, both in a typing format and also in a screen format. I think we've all might be a little zoomed out these days, but also thinking about everyone grabbing like a treat and having tea and having that space to chat about things that are also not just work related. That was something that was really crucial for our team when we were in full lockdown. So those are some ideas out there as well. Yeah, thank you for that suggestion with bringing up work roadblocks. Sometimes bringing in another person can help bring some fresh ideas to solve a roadblock. And that's actually something that I really miss about our office dynamic, and we've been able to do this a little bit virtually. So I'm in one of our student spaces, and we have 5 computers over here, and so as people are working and they hit a problem, they can turn to their colleague and be like, hey, can you take a look at this? And what do you think? And so one of the things that we've done, even in our virtual remote workplace situation, is I've still tried to group our students to be working at certain times, and we're all logged into Microsoft Teams so that we can keep a conversation going. And then with Teams, it's really easy just to have a video chat with someone or a follow-up conversation so that people can ask each other for help or perspective. All right, so taking a look, sometimes you know the right person to ask when you need help. but you also know that that person has a lot on their plate. How do you get help while respecting capacity? So I'm just gonna be truthful here. And Stephanie and any of our students could attest to this. I don't know about you all, but do you feel like you're just running from one meeting to another? And so sometimes I feel like I don't get to see my teammates because of the nature of schedules and things like that. And so what I say to folks is, when I make a point in between that time to check in with people. And also I am like, if you need something, ask for time, knock on the door, save your questions, and let's take 15 minutes to chat. And so that's a way of being able to respect time. But yeah, I mean, I think, this other comment, Aaron, sometimes being able to be open with roadblocks and challenges can actually help build team rapport as you're able to be honest and share that vulnerability and be like, I need help. One of the things I say to our team time and time again is the best skill that they can learn at Alarm during their time is to learn to ask for help. And I model that. I'm always asking for help. And I love it when our full-time and part-time team can also model that. And I ask our students for help. It's important that everyone can rely upon each other for that. So one last thing that I did want to bring up before we move into our closing centering, something that can be really challenging in a work dynamic is figuring out how to address problems and or hiccups that happen in team dynamics. And that's one of the reasons why I am integrating yoga and breath work into today's session, because I think it's really important to breathe and be grounded in this. And also remember human experience. We know a fraction of the percentage of what's going on in someone else's mind. We only know what someone tells you. And so, their tone, what's going on for them, their energy, most likely doesn't have anything to do with you, but it is important to be able to bring things up. So in terms of asking for or tips for providing constructive feedback, we have this great piece of artwork in our office that every mistake is progress, and I would put it in parentheses, as long as we're learning from them. So, embrace mistakes as an opportunity to learn and grow. Be self-reflective, acknowledge your part in something not being successful, and then create the space for the other person to acknowledge that. Be really cautious about blanket statements and negative self-talk. Blanket statements is where you bring something up into the 1,000-foot lens and you don't see the details that hold it up. So you want to get out of being like, oh, that person did a bad job, to, okay, this person did really well with these things, but these are some very specific things that they can work on. So when you're giving constructive feedback and things like that, again, avoid those blanket statements, because blanket statements tend to put people on the offense and they can't hear or actually participate fully in the conversation. If you're going to have a discussion about something at work, make sure that they know the agenda and it's really clear so everyone can be prepared. So I have an example here, like, hey, Julie, I'd like to talk to you about stream team in Potter County. What do you think is going well? What do you don't, what's not going well, so that you're starting it with a conversation. And so hopefully that gives the space for the other person to also self-identify some areas of challenge and makes it easier for them to bring up roadblocks. Listen, and again, be very specific. So for example, for things that are behavior oriented, as opposed to being like, oh my gosh, Julie, she's such a witch. It's Halloween, so that's why I use that example. Bringing up something like, hey, Julie, I noticed that you're really stressed out and you're a little short in conversations with people. And then like, oh my gosh, that's a great mirror. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And always coming at it from a kind, compassionate place. And if you're able to breathe and be centered as you're going into providing feedback, that's really, really important. So let people, if you have other questions or comments, go ahead and throw those in the chat. I'm noting that we have 7 minutes left in our session. So I want to make sure that there is the space for Q&A, but also want to make sure there's space for closing centering. So if you have thoughts, questions, let's go ahead, throw that in the chat. And in the meanwhile, we'll go ahead and move into a closing centering. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. All right. Actually, I really don't need to be pinned, so I'm going to undo that. So for our closing centering, I invite everyone to come into a comfortable seated position once again. And again, you know, moving from wherever you are on the couch or your chair and coming to the edge of your seat and taking that moment to find a nice, long, supported spine. Reconnecting to the length in your spine, reaching the crown of your head up towards the ceiling and rolling your shoulders back and down, shining your heart forward. And your eyes can be closed or you can have a soft gaze down. And connect to your breath. Connecting to the cooling inhale through your nostrils and the warming exhale. Breathing in and breathing out. And I invite you to envision in your mind a location that brings you joy, a location where you're safe, and a location where you can restore and rest. This might be a place that you visit in your mind, or it might be a place you visit from time to time. And as you engage your safe, happy, restorative space, begin to connect to your 5 senses. Starting with what you smell. What do you smell in your happy, supported space? Is it fragrant? Is it light? Breathe it in, let it out. Breathe it in and let it go. What do you taste in your happy place? Is it sweet or is it salty? Breathe it in, let it out. Breathe it in and let it go. What do you see in your happy, safe place? Is it bright or is it dark? Breathe it in, let it out. Breathe it in and let it go. What do you hear in your safe, restorative place? Is it loud or is it quiet? Breathe it in, let it out. Breathe it in and let it go. What do you feel in your happy place? Are you warm or are you cool? Breathe it in, let it out. Breathe it in and let it go. And allow yourself to engage all 5 of those senses, seeing what you smell, taste, see, hear, and feel. Breathe it all in, breathe it all out. Breathe it all in and let it all go. Breathing in, relaxation. Breathing out, release. And gradually begin to connect back to your breath. Once again, finding that cooling inhale and the warming exhale. Gradually coming into this, back to the space, wiggling your fingers and toes, and maybe giving yourself a little bit of that deep shoulder action to wiggle it out. And before we open our eyes, we're going to draw our hands together at heart center. We're going to take a deep breath in, release with a sigh, and then another deep breath in and release with another sigh. Taking a deep breath in. And again. Fluttering your eyes open, making your way back, and coming back into our space. Thank you all so much for joining me today. And thank you so much to Kate and Brenna for helping to run the show. And I'll hand it over to Brenna for our closing announcements.
Thanks, Julie. Let's give Julie a virtual round of applause. You can use your reactions or you can do actual real applause. You will see that the conference is continuing at 12:30, so get up, do a little bit more movement, grab your lunch, a coffee again if you need it, and join us back on Sched. Full schedule is in the chat box. For those that are joining us and have social media, please feel free to hashtag Ches Forum or Ches Collective. And the next session will start at 12:30. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much.